Over the next 40 minutes, we will be discussing translation in the context of domestic film industries in individual European countries, which I think is a very interesting topic. I believe that especially in small countries, hardly any film could be produced without the input of a translator, and hopefully a good one. And now we are going to take a closer look at this adventure, which I could describe as internationalization of domestic content, of local content, maybe, I don't know. First of all, I would like to welcome our guests. Zuzana Mistríková, our famous producer with a published production company who worked on such films or co-produced or produced such films as Občanský průkaz, who you know. I wonder how that title was translated into English. ID card, yeah, okay. Učiteľka, The Teacher, a famous and very successful Slovak film. Most recently, The Painted Bird, Pomalované vtáča, a film which premiered at the International Film Festival in Venice 2019. Alexandra Strelková, translator herself and a representative of Association of Independent Producers. Ian Burley, translator himself. Yeah, we saw a clip from his translation, so we know he's been working, and he's mostly working from French into English or other languages into English. Yeah. Oh, Italian, you mentioned, yeah. Amalie Foss, who is the president of AVTE, translator herself, subtitler, also translates into English, apart from other translations also into English. So welcome. In recent years, the European film industry has been booming, and there are several reasons for this trend. Local audiences are interested in domestic films. They do come to cinemas, and you can see that even in Slovakia. Audiovisual industry is highly profitable. Not always, but there are countries where this is true. Individual countries support AV production through national film funds. Like in Slovakia, we have Audiovizuálny fond, and in many countries, the system is very similar to this one. And also, the EU itself supports production of European audiovisual content, mainly through the media program. This situation encourages international co-production, because especially in small countries like Slovakia, limited financial resources force producers to seek partners elsewhere in order to generate financial resources and also to broaden the exploitation potential of the film. For example, in Slovakia, we have a lot of Czech and Slovak productions which help to grow the film also in other territories. And this is where the translator steps in. The language of the film industry is in most cases English, and everything that is created in the pre-production process is translated into English, and of course not only English, because sometimes we have international cast, then the script has to be translated into the language of the star actor. For example, if it's from Poland, then it's Polish. When applying for European funds, the producer has to submit a detailed documentation of a film, including treatments, statements, and scripts themselves. That means it's hundreds and hundreds of pages sometimes. And the quality of the translation in this case is vital because the competition is fierce. The clarity of language is one of the important aspects which can decide whether or not a project is successful. So we are talking money. And now I turn to my guests. Let's start with the producers, because it's so nice to have film producers among us. You know, at international conferences, we usually like these people because we think that many of them do not realize the importance, the necessity of good translation. So, Zuzana and Alexandra, what is your experience when working on international co-productions? Let's put it this way. What do you expect of a good translation? What do you expect of the outcome of your cooperation on an international pre-production?
Good morning. First of all, I would like to apologize for my English. In this community, I really will be someone speaking producer kitchen English. So, okay. As Mirka said, there are more steps we need in the process of producing a film. we need to cooperate with translators. And if you ask the producers in Slovakia, they will just name 2-3 people. They are for them like the quality that you don't need another improvement to be sure that you are sending the materials for the Eurimage or for the future co-producers, and to be sure that they will really understand what in the project is, because sometimes it is very hard to read a script even in your own language. Reading script is not like easy things. It's not like the book. You have to realize what was said also before, that you have to, the language is only one of the expression of the film. You are speaking through the images, so also the script already knows that there is not only way how to express in the future film. So it is very necessary to work with the people. They already understand this thing, and then of course the ability of the people they are working with us to be able to express the same thing in the, not only in the language but in the audiovisual culture we are going to be the partner and to find money, a distributor, producer, however. So the translation of the film, it's like really the last step in this process, which is also, I have to say, crucial. Because, for example, for the film The Teacher, which was like a miracle in Slovak and Czech context, this film was distributed all over the world. It was in Italian and Spanish cinema dubbed. It's the English dialogue list, like crucial. It's not crucial only for the English territory, but it's the material that is using for all other languages they are coming to the other territories. So I don't know what, because the question was so wide, Mirka, I don't know what for the beginning would like to, probably Alexandra
can.
Who is doing it.
Well, not only that, but for many years I used to work with the Slovak Film Center, which meant working with producers who were going abroad with their projects. So meaning not only finished films that were shown on festivals, but you actually start with the film project really in the state of the development, sometimes even before that I have an idea, I want to go international because it's a fantastic, brilliant piece already in my mind, quoting some of the scriptwriters, for example. And so basically you start with using translations in this very early stage. And I have to say, having worked in the field for, let's say, the last 15 years, I could see how much the realization of producers, but also directors and scriptwriters developed, that they really need good translations. Because me sitting on 2 stools since forever, one of my jobs as the director of the Film Center was actually proofreading and editing the materials I got from the filmmakers. But I think also one of the things that you mentioned, but it's not always discussed, is really the huge amount of materials you get towards getting the final film. And even as you said that translating the film itself is the very final stage, I dare to disagree a little bit, knowing that you work, especially if you work in co-productions, but also if you have a national film that you hope and plan to present internationally at some point, actually much earlier you start working with your clips, with the shot material, rough cuts, which comes a bit later, but you actually go to international forums, you go to co-production forums, to pitching forums with different people, and you need to have especially English versions. So one of the things you need from a translator, ideally you have one particular one, for example, for translating the film in various stages, but this translator also needs to be very patient, because you can end up watching a movie in its 3-4 versions, and is not always only replacing subtitles within the chart. It's sometimes really omitting some, adding some, and even after the rough cut is made, you then get the sound, which can also be something different. I'm sure you can confirm. So it's usually a very long process, which is different from, for example, subtitling for distribution, because if you work for a distributor and you want to create local subtitles, you get the final film, you get the materials which are either in the original language or only in English, depending on what kind of film we are talking about, and then you do the translation usually within 2-3 weeks. Let's be open about that. So this is a bit different than working with a film during its creation. I think this is also important to say. Not many people realize that.
You were not disagree because I said there is a long process and the last one is the last version.
Yeah, we all know, I think that my colleagues would confirm that very often we are approached by a film producer and say, oh, please, I have a project, but, the deadline was yesterday, how many pages? Oh, not too many, about 80, so. Ian, can you confirm or tell us something about your experience in France?
Well, I can confirm everything that's been said so far. It's absolutely true that a translator can work from the very first idea. If a producer wants to go to a festival or a film workshop to pitch an idea, and the text is, in my case, in French, it will have to be translated into English for the international workshop. And this process will be followed through, hopefully, by the same translator through the whole project. And in some cases, it's even happened where, for example, I've had to translate letters written to people like Bob Dylan and Bruce Springsteen to ask for permission to use music because their agents were getting in the way, and so somebody had found a way to get to them directly, and in fact they ended up accepting to use their songs in the movies. But it's a really long process. I mean, some films can be 3, 4, 5 years. You're working on it from the very beginning until you see the final cut. For example, at the moment with the Berlin Festival coming up, everybody is trying to get their movie into Berlin. The movies aren't finished yet, so they're presenting temporary versions. I've just worked on one where it was sent off to Berlin. I've already been told there's going to be a new version with a new mix within a few weeks. So, yeah, everything is true. It's exactly that's the situation.
What would be your input, apart from translating part? You do not only translate, because film script is, like Zuzka said, is a specific type of product, of literally product. It is images in words, basically. Sometimes the images are bad. Like, for example, in Slovakia, you can have a script and somebody is a bad writer. So the sentence would be 10 lines, so you get lost. If you do something like that in English, nobody would read,
Well, the French are notorious for that. I think most French screenwriters think they're Marcel Proust, and so they will write a whole page. I mean, there was an Italian movie I did a few years ago, Paolo Sorrentino, and there were 2 pages of description of a bullet going down the barrel of a gun. This was in a screenplay. It was 2 pages long. It just made no sense at all. And the French are notorious for that because they will not use sentences, they will just use commas. And so you'll have these sentences that go on. So basically when I work on the script, to make it easier for English readers, English language readers, and not just people whose native language is English, but everybody within the European Commission on Eurimage panels who have to decide. I break it down and make it as simple as possible and as direct as possible, because a script in English is very, very direct. It doesn't go about saying, he walks into the room thinking about his wife who died a year before, and you can tell on his face that she made him very happy, but he's still sad. And the sun is coming down through the window. And, yeah. And the French will do sentences like that. So in English, you have to sort of re-edit, basically. The editing stage begins with the translator, almost.
Amalie, you wanted to add something?
Well, yes, I translate from Danish, sometimes Swedish into English, but for movies, it's been from Danish. And I have to say, this with the overlong sentences is not something that burdens Danish script writers. I don't think, I'm not going to say anything about the level of education or anything like that. They certainly don't feel themselves that they are undereducated in any way. But sometimes, even though they express themselves in very simple terms, it is actually difficult to understand what they mean. And sometimes you get just a treatment. That's the very first thing you get, a treatment that's going off to somebody. And yes, you're editing, you're correcting, you're the proofreader, nanny, nursemaid, but they do have a very specific idea, not to underestimate them. They do have very specific ideas. They want one thing exactly. And you have to, in the case of Denmark mainly, you have to sort of sort through all the, what is this, to find that idea. And screenwriters, then there's the actual script, somebody will call you. Obviously, it's Monday and it's going off to a festival Wednesday, and or it's going off to the investors or somebody. Or they're in this last thing I was working on. It was my sister who called me, so I also didn't get enough pay because she can always beat me down. But she was the line producer, and she said, the translator has fallen ill, and you have to do this. So me and a colleague did it, and it was sort of half finished, and we're working on it. We're finding somebody for the German dialogue and finding somebody for the French dialogue, and the director kept writing it changes. And when I talked to my German colleagues to find somebody for the German dialogue, they said yes, and they obviously assumed that this would be something that had to be ready in a month or two, because it was to show the investors. I said, no, they start shooting in a week. You know, can we get this done? They were totally shocked. So maybe in Germany, I don't know. And at one point, they said, have you finished this? Because the meeting starts in 2 hours, and they're doing something tomorrow already. And that's how it goes. And the changes just keep coming in.
Yeah, actually, I can confirm my sister is translator. And friend of Mirka, so I'm just calling all the time.
And I just, because when I spoke before, I was telling about different versions of the film, but actually it much more applies to the scripts, and you were actually pointing it out. And sometimes translators, if they are not experienced enough, don't expect that. But once you receive a script is never finished until it's shot and shown on screen. It even continues in the editing room. So with the script, you have to be always very patient and very careful, because speaking about script is important, because what is the trend right now in our countries, which is probably the development has already been around in other countries or in the Western countries earlier, but now we in our countries feel a very big lack of quality scripts, and we say it's kind of a crisis of talent, which may or may not be true. But what is now also highly supported by the media program, by Creative Europe, are all sorts of workshops and these professional platforms for scriptwriters. You meet script editors. Those people are usually from abroad. So it's kind of like dramaturgy, whatever the title is actually in English. And for this, you need English translations of your scripts, which is very tricky, because very often you as a scriptwriter are struggling with getting your idea written down in your original language. And then come all those, sometimes it's very subtle changes, which you as a translator have to actually decipher. Because these script editors are waiting for your, as a scriptwriter, they're waiting for your next version, how deep you understood actually what you are doing. So script translation is also getting, in our countries, much more asked for discipline, I would say. Because the translation of the film itself, the subtitles comes then much later.
Could I just
Yes.
add one thing? I think it's very important as a translator to read as many scripts in English,
Yes.
written by
Yes.
English or American authors, just to get the vocabulary, because they refer to camera shots, camera angles,
Yes.
things like that, which you need to be able to put correctly into English. Like often in a French script, you will have tête de Jean, which literally means John's head. But in English, that would be a reaction shot.
Yeah.
But the French would just simply put that, and everybody thinks, oh, that's great. But
It's
You have to
tricky in
keep-
all the languages, like in Slovak we have detail, which is a close up or close shot, you know. And if you do not speak that lingo, that specific lingo well enough, then you have detail, you know.
And also Anglo-Saxon scripts are in a very specific format of
Yeah.
Courier 12 with a certain layout, and there are software programs that allow you to work in that format.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So before actually you can translate such things into English, you have to understand film and film industry and film theory yourself. So you need to understand film itself. Then there are tricky things like we discussed this morning with Amalie, and she said, yeah, I would kill myself if I had something like that in my script. For example, there are dialects. You know, you would have a film, French film, and there is a dialect, and the whole scene is about somebody speaks this dialect, somebody else is speaking, like in Slovakia we would have Westerners and East Slovakian, and the whole script is about this. How do you transfer this thing into English, or how do you play with something like that so that the reader understands?
I can give a specific example of a film which was called Maloute by the French director Bruno Dumont. Bruno Dumont is a very strange screenwriter because he writes everything in the past historic tense. And basically his producers translate the script into French for me before they give it to me, because it is totally incomprehensible, everything that he writes. But Maloute was basically the story of fishermen, a small fishing family in northern France, compared to a bourgeois family. And they were the fishing family's dialogue was in a very specific ch'ti dialogue, which was from northern France. And in that case, what I did was use the dialect of the area that I come from in the UK, the Black Country, to translate those people, and then the bourgeois families were translated with normal English, higher class English. And it actually worked. But when it came to doing the subtitles, I tried to do the same thing, and that's when the foreign sales agent said, no way. We want everybody to speak the same because the Koreans will not understand. Which was crazy because I think the Koreans probably spoke better English than the French sales agent. But this is always the problem I come up against, where I have to tend to dumb down things for the international sales, because when I come to the subtitles, the French version subtitled in English is the one that's going to be used for sales all over the world. So it has, the sales agents say it has to be as simple as possible. I don't necessarily agree with that because you lose the flavor of the film. It's a conflict all the time.
Yes, this is a big problem. Dialects it is usually just, oh, shoot me, you know, when you get something like that. But the script I just worked on is the characters are from the south of Jutland, near the border to Germany, and it's a very distinctive dialect, and it can be very difficult to understand even. The thing is, you can, with Danish and English, you can sort of say, all right, the west or north of Jutland can sometimes correspond to the dialect they speak in Yorkshire, for instance. There are certain things that it's congenial in certain respects, and you can use that. But what if the film's going to the United States to be shown, where they haven't a clue what people speak like in Yorkshire? You know, they just don't know. So, or it's going to like the international audience or the international buyer. And I agree completely with what you said, Ian, that sometimes the salespeople are far less savvy linguistically than they think they are. And actually you can sneak in a lot more flavor than you're allowed to. I agree with that. But you do have to simplify, you do lose some nuance because it's going to an international audience where nobody is a native speaker, because you kind of have to aim for something somewhere in the middle somewhere. But one thing I have found is that if I were a producer and I was selling something, and I sold my film for distribution in the UK, and I also sold my film for distribution in the US, I would do 2 different sets of subtitles. I mean, it's difficult to do it with dubbing, and it's not the same thing. But for subtitling, I would definitely do that. I don't know enough about Australian, Canadian, and South African to tell you, but for those 2 markets, I would certainly do that. You can allow yourself much more. There's so much the British don't understand about the way Americans speak and vice versa. But you could go so much further. And subtitling is inexpensive. It's very inexpensive. So, yes?
Sometimes it's not only the question of the dialogue. I produced a documentary film about Mečiar, about the Prime Minister in Slovakia in 90s. You all remember his speeches. And he was very charismatic. And if you just listen to him, he's like you have the feeling everything is clear. If you see it written, the director, I think Mirka could say, because she was also struggling with it, because in the end, the director, Teresa, has the boyfriend in New York, and she just showed him the film, and he was, actually, what kind of translation it is? And she said, but this is what he really said, but it doesn't make any sense. Yeah, that's true, but how to do it, not to get the people thinking that the translation is bad. So it's another question, like with the dialect.
You wanted to say something?
I just wanted to add what you said about sales agents, which is also an even more and more important part of the network. Those are the people who, if you are lucky, but get your film and represent it, internationally and do the sales. So it's not a producer approaching TV broadcasters or different countries' distributions, but it's the agent doing it for you. So it's basically regular agent, and they require. It's usually it's the same by every sales agent. The number of materials they need from you. Very rarely they include the original dialogue list or the subtitle list in the original language, which should be the basis basically for any other foreign subtitles. So basically what they do is either accept your English subtitles or they have them done with their translators, which depending on which country you're from, because I think from our country, small countries, they take what you give them and sometimes do some editing, but not even that, I dare say. And then this is actually the package that travels with your film. So it's really important, I think, what I tried to talk to producers about, try to persuade them to include the original and have the original dialogue list there. Because in some countries you can find translators who can do it from the original language. Then, of course, you have festivals, as we were discussing yesterday, that when the film travels to the festivals, very often the only package you get from the distributors or the producers or the sales agents is only the English material. And if you find a translator, let's say, for a Portuguese film, he would have to, or she would have to do it by audio, because there is no materials and there is no way in getting the materials, because no sales agent would bother in asking the producer getting it. So actually having English subtitles is really, or having good English subtitles, perhaps even in a version with notes or as a dialogue list, which we know is different, might be much helpful in getting your films understood internationally in countries like Korea or even Italy. So we don't really have to go that far. And I think this is something that our producers start to realize or have come to realize more than 10 years ago.
Small remark, as the dubbing for the teacher was made in Italy, the distributor, it was like very energetic lady, and she just called us from the studio because she had the feeling that some situation from the English materials and what she felt from the film, it's not exactly. And she just called us. She called Luba and said, "Are you sure that this sentence in this situation it's correctly this way?" What was very surprising for me. But if you have the partner, they are really patient for the film. It's great, and you have to understand that in the world there is producing 30,000 documentaries yearly, and let's say 2,000 feature films, and I think more. Even in Europe, like 1,500. Yeah. So, and if you would like to be recognized, this work is, in the end, don't tell the directors and scriptwriters, even more, there is even more work with it as with the film itself. And as the film is something you are just living with 3 years, you are doing everything that someone will watch. So it's very special kind of work. In our territory, it is very hard to do it because you have no funding. You have some, but there is a lot of work, a lot of energy. So, but then this is something which is very important, and you are a very important part of it, because we will be never successful if the first contact people will not understand this special thing which is in this film.
Yeah, like documentary is basically big talking heads, and if you don't know what they're talking about, then you don't know. Ian and Amalie, and then we will have some questions, I'm sure, and also tell us what you want, and then tell us, do French filmmakers listen to your suggestions, if you have one?
Well, first of all, I'd like to make a point about what Alexandra said about the materials. It's really important that the original dialogue list should be included, because many of the mistakes that we highlighted in the French subtitles of Roma were due to mistakes in the English translation at the start, or a misinterpretation of the English subtitle. And it was clear that the French subtitler hadn't worked from the original Spanish dialogue. So it's very, very important not just to send off the English subtitles, because if there's a mistake in the English subtitle, it's going to be perpetuated through all the other versions. So what was your next question?
Yes. Do they listen to your suggestions?
The French, some do.
Some do.
Yeah, some directors listen. But the thing in France is there's this whole auteur thing, where the director is the screenwriter and it's his baby, and you have to be very, very careful. Some can listen, some, I would say perhaps 25% can listen, but 75% just don't care.
Yeah.
But certainly there is a rise now, there is a movement in France towards more to the screenwriting profession becoming a true profession and having screenwriters who are distinct from directors. It's beginning to happen a little more. Yeah.
What about Denmark?
Well, can I just start by saying I'm very happy to meet producers who really take this seriously and understand it completely.
Who are enlightened, yes.
I think perhaps you could do a masterclass for producers, worldwide to make them understand this, because so few of them do. And it's very strange, because we all, apart from the French, we all come from not small languages if you have 3,000 speakers, but smaller languages, and we want our products to travel and reach the world, and that's usually done through one of the major languages, Spanish, Chinese, French. Which one did I miss? English. Oh, that one. Yes. And and they don't, it's an afterthought. It's always an afterthought. And also the Danish film directors are auteurs and they are screenwriters and they do everything, and they do have some very clear ideas, but they have very little knowledge. And they don't think it's necessary, because everybody can speak, and everybody can speak a bit of another language, and they don't understand this profound necessity for working the translation or the communicating your product to the world bit into every step of the way. And also in the case of Denmark, a lot of TV series the last decade or so have been exported and have been doing very well. And still, they're not bothering very much with the translations. I have a friend in the UK who loves anything Scandi. She thinks it's wonderful. She said, I was trying to watch The Killing, this was years ago, and I just couldn't understand what was going on. And then I talked to Polish colleagues who had been called in for the second season to save the translation, because they'd been trying to save money since season 1. So they got very inexperienced translators to do the work. And then somebody else had to doctor it, to just get it to a certain level. And it's just such a shame, because it's 2 little lines and they can sell your product in a very loyal and truthful way all over the world. Thank you.
Alexandra?
I also had a point which we discussed with Emília yesterday as well, and me, as I mentioned, sitting on 2 stools and not being a producer myself, which I see as an advantage in many respects, but still working with the Association of Producers. What I found out in my practice, which is aside what you mentioned about the regional dialogue list, what I found out that actually, as the script, as I told you, is developing, and it's something completely different, the final version you see on screen, as everybody is exhausted by that time, and the life of the film starts to go in its own way, it's strange, but you actually find out that the filmmakers themselves don't have the transcripts of their final versions. So what happens very often, and it happened to me as a translator at this time, that I was given a film to work on the subtitles, and actually first I had to do the transcript myself, which is, for example, in English, of course, I had to consult a lot of things because you just don't get it by your ear, and even if you do, sometimes you don't understand. So this is, I think, also something I tell producers to think about. And the idea I mentioned in the beginning, what we started with Zuzana and the Association of Independent Producers last year with the film festival, Art Film Fest in Košice, was a series of talks about collaboration of producers and TV broadcasters, which is a topic that partly may be interesting for translators, because if international series are coming, they will need to work with you. And we also had a meeting with Netflix people a couple of days ago, who are also, as I know, very interested and actually very professional about their subtitling, from what I heard. And I also had the idea of continuing this series of talks and possibly combining ideas and, for example, have people from your association working with us on some particular topic. So I would be also very happy if we could organize something, come up with some ideas which we could do on one hand for producers, film producers, which could be an exchange of ideas, that what you expect, what they expect, or what they should expect. And then also we were talking with Emília about creating something interesting for more general audience, because people, actually the recipients of the subtitles are the viewers. So, and many people think, okay, there are open subs and that's it. But let's find some interesting way of popularizing this topic also among broader audience. So that were my notes.
Just a small remark. We sometimes just can't anymore. And not every film, of course, it's the film which will travel, even if you make everything right. So sometimes it's really like you are doing some puzzle. You are just trying to get I have to say that our partner for the teacher was Level K, which is Danish-based sales agent. very good one. And, sometimes we will start this discussion and then probably start the discussion with the audiovisual fund. Probably it should be really one special part of the discipline you are doing, and you need some money for it, because then you are using the Polish translator.
Well, yeah. Amalie, one small, tiny remark. I see another workshop emerging on the horizon.
Yes.
From what you're saying,
This could be a wonderful workshop. We could come up actually with a manual of how to do it, how to incorporate translation into your project, which I think is very important for filmmakers and television creators all across Europe. And also this thing that you think about the funding for the translation when you apply for funds, when you try and get investors interested, or you apply for grants. Even there, it has to be worked in. But yes, we could do.
Monday and Wednesday.
Yeah.
No, when you dream up the whole thing, yes, between Monday and Wednesday.
So we are running slightly late, but there is still some room, I hope, for questions. We need to give some room for questions, and we'll have a shorter break if Olga agrees. So any questions, please? I'll run to you gladly to move.
Well, I just would like to say that the movie is not just about the dialogues, it's also about the symbolism. Every film producer comes from certain cultural background, and there is plenty of symbolism in the background of the movie which doesn't come up in the dialogues. For example, right at the beginning you mentioned the film Občanský průkaz, which you translated as ID. And ID card. Well, I'm the generation which still remembers Občanský průkaz, and I say that this translation is completely wrong. Because ID card is what we all have in your pocket. It's just really a card with basic data, name, surname, place of birth, address, and that's all. But the ID card which we had under the communists, it was actually a booklet which contained 32 pages, and there was plenty of information about the position of the citizen within the communist or socialist society. For example, there was a mention that I was a soldier, which meant if the American imperialists decided to wage a war against us, I would be the one to be drafted. There was it could be used as a passport into the countries of Warsaw Pact. But there had to be a stamp which I, for example, didn't have, so I couldn't use it as a passport. There was a stamp about whether you worked. If you didn't have a stamp of an employer, that meant you were a parasite, and that was a very serious offense, and it was liable to prosecution. Another thing was, if you had too many stamps of employers, that meant you were unreliable person, you are unstable person. You had to have only one stamp from one employer from the moment you finished the school until you went into the pension, until you became pensioner. If you had more than one stamp, well, there was something wrong about you. For example, if you were divorced, then if you had to pay child support to your former wife, it was also in this ID. So if you translated ID, Občanský průkaz, as ID card, well, it was very wrong translation. And I wonder, how do you deal with this kind of a symbolism in the movies, and if you think it is possible to deal with this kind of symbolism in the movies? Forgetting about the ID card or ID booklet, let's go into different things which, say, American culture has, but maybe Slovak still doesn't.
I'm not completely agree with you. Of course, what you said about the translation itself, it's right. But the film, it's about 15 years boys. They becoming adult because they receive ID. And what does mean in country of Czechoslovakia in 70s, starting to be 15 years with ID and responsible for the things you are speaking about. So I am not quite sure if to the subject of the film, if it's so wrong. But you are right that sometimes just the calc, just the translation of the name of the film, it's the best way how to do it. You should be more concrete to the subject of the film. And what is the film about?
Yeah, it is always difficult, and as you say, it is tricky thing. The title is a tricky thing, and very often you have to think for months to find a good title in English. Very shortly, please.
Yeah, just to say that in each country there is something that is unique to that country and that is very, very difficult to translate. And very often it's a give and take. You know, how do you convey the original meaning, and how much does the audience understand from just the title? And then a lot of the time, the people who are saying it doesn't matter so much. It's more important to have a catchy title in English. Not in this case. I'm sure you thought about it a lot.
But it's very necessary not to mislead. Yeah, probably you attract the people first day to the cinemas, but if you are misleading them by the trailer name or something, it's not good for the film in the end.
One more question, Jean-François, please.
Thank you. About the issue of translating titles, it should be noted that translators are usually not involved in the translation of titles. It's usually marketing departments or the distributors at the distribution stage who decide on which title it's going to be. In the case of the film, one of the clips I showed, the film called Bride and Prejudice in English, with my colleague, we tried to suggest a couple of titles in French. Maybe they were not good, but in the end we learned that even before we made those proposals, the marketing department of a big company, which is AVTE in France, had decided to call it in French Love at First Sight in Bollywood, which has nothing to do with the film. It doesn't mean anything, but only because it was mimicked on a film which was Love at First Sight in Notting Hill. I can't remember the title of the English film, just Notting Hill. So it was called Coup de Foudre à Notting Hill, and then which they had released. And so they thought, well, we're going to call it that. And Bollywood is not a place to start with, and it had nothing to do with the story.
But sometimes I have to say it's up to professionalism of the people. Sometimes you, as the producer from the original country, have the feeling that the translation, you don't understand the connotation of the translation. But sometimes if the distributor is a really good one, then you realize they just say to their people in their culture something which is very familiar with your film.